Hey everyone, my name's Alexandra and I am a watercolor artist. Today I want to share with you guys some tips and tricks for when you're starting with watercolor or if you've been painting for a while to know how much paint to use and how much water, especially depending on what technique you're going for. Let's get started. Right, so we are just going to dive right into painting, and as we're going, I'm going to talk about different ways to know, again, how much paint, how much water to use. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is often when people are starting with watercolor, it's such a struggle to know how much, and the main thing that I notice is people not using enough water. So if you struggle with that, you're not the only one. I teach classes often, and people have this habit of just barely dipping their paintbrush into either their water cup or their paint palette, and it's just hard for them to retrain their mind to actually use water to their advantage when they're painting. So starting from the beginning, what you guys want to do when you're painting is making sure that you are fully submerging your paintbrush into the water and getting all of the bristles wet. I often find that people are just doing a tiny little dip into their cup of water and then they're wondering why they're getting more of, it is a technique to do dry on dry, but often that's not what people are going for as their main technique. So they wonder why they're seeing sort of that grainy look and that white space through their painting. So I'm just gonna show you guys what that looks like, and then I'll show you guys how to fix it. So I'm gonna go into my paint palette and I'm just gonna get pretty condensed paint. I'm gonna dry off on my napkin. So I'll over exaggerate this just so that you guys know what I'm doing. All right, and you'll notice when I paint on my paper, the white shows through a lot, and that is a dry on dry technique, but that's often not the main thing that I'm going for in my paintings. So we are gonna fix that and add some more water. All right, so now we're gonna go back to what I showed you initially of fully coating your paintbrush in the water. And I'm gonna show you guys sort of the second mistake that people often make, and that is using too much water. So let's say I'm painting with my green paint here. I'm mixing it in, have a lot of water on my palette, a lot of water on my paintbrush. And then I find when I go to paint, because I'm using green, I'm gonna do leaves as our example, but when I go to paint a leaf, there's a lot of water. I don't normally paint with my paper on an angle like this, but because it is, you can see it all pooling towards the bottom of my paper there. And this will make it dry with just a really weird effect. If you're trying to bleed colors in, you'll notice that it will not dry exactly how you want it to. So I'll just take some green and try to bleed it in there, and it spreads out. You don't get as much of that effect with color pulling, and as it dries, you'll see that the color is going to sort of pool at the bottom there. So another thing when we're painting, a good test of if you have too much water is to take your paper, to lift it up. If you notice that the water is dripping down as you lifted it up, chances are you've used too much water. So what ways can we fix this, change this, and help avoid that problem or fix the problem if we find we're using too much water? So we're gonna start again from where we just were, and that is rinsing our paintbrush in our water cup. This time, one of the big differences is that I'm gonna sort of get some of that excess water off on the edge of my cup here. And then I'm gonna go into my paint. So we're gonna go into the green again. And I'm mixing it on my palette, so it's still pretty watery on there, which is fine. Let's say I'm going for a lighter green. I want it to be more watery so it's more translucent. But now what I'm going to do is use my napkin, and I'm going to just dab off some of that excess water. So now if I go and I paint, you'll notice right away it goes on much, much smoother. And if I am holding this, so again, because it's on an angle, it is pooling a little bit at the bottom, but not a ton. And you'll see how it sort of blends in and bleeds in so much quicker. So now, let's say if we wanted to go in and do some color mixing in there, when I go in with a different color, the bleed is just so much smoother and more dramatic. It doesn't spread into the entirety of where I painted water. So one of the things that you guys can do when you're painting is lift your paper to check it. See, if you find that it's dripping, then that means you need to take away some of the water. So if you're thinking, well, it happens every time and I don't know how to fix it, there are ways to take some of that water back once you've started painting. So with this one, with the second one I showed you guys, I can still see that the water is still there at the bottom. So what I can do is I can go and dry off my paintbrush, and I can actually go back in, and with my sort of dry paintbrush, I can pick up some of that water off my page. So now if I go back in, let's say I want to add a brighter green in there, and again, you'll notice reason for my napkin is part of it is testing the color, part of it is just getting that excess water off that I don't want. So now that I've done that, because this is still damp, I can now go in, and if I'm just shading the one side with the green, you can see right away it bleeds into it so much nicer. When I did it the first time, you almost didn't even notice because it spread into the entirety of my leaf. So with this, one of the things for you guys to practice is pick something, anything. I like to practice with leaves and just paint it over and over and over again, and trial and error. Try it with more water, with less water, more paint, less paint, because I know too, if I want to not get the dry on dry technique, but I want to paint a really dark leaf, I'll show you guys right now. I have to go into my paint, and I'm going into it less watery, a little bit more opaque, a little bit more pigmented. So I'm just trying to get lots of color on there, but I'm mixing it in this palette here where there's still water, so I know that my paintbrush is still fully coated. So now what I can do is, again, use my napkin, check it. I can see I might get a little bit more. I can see that it's still coming onto my napkin pretty dark. So now when I go, and I might just get rid of a little bit more of that water. Now when I go to paint my leaf, I'm getting this really nice, vibrant color. And I'm not getting this grainy dry on dry technique because I made sure that my paintbrush was fully coated with water. So if you guys are practicing, just try different levels of water, different levels of paint, and see what you get, and take time. It's sort of like when people are learning things like singing or piano and things like that, and they're told to practice scales, and sometimes it can feel tedious to do these things, but it will help you guys with your water control so much more, which I can tell you will truly transform your paintings. The last thing I want to touch on quickly is just consistency with your palette depending on what color you're going for. The beauty with watercolor is that if we have, say I've been using my green on my palette here, if I want to get the color to be lighter, then I just add more water. And if I want it darker, then I want it more pigmented with more paint. So there's a few different ways that I look at my water when I'm looking for the consistency, and just how I want it to show up. So when it's super watery, I know that I'm gonna get that nice light color. So even with a super, super watery palette, I will dry on my paper and I can get, I think I had too much water on there, and I can get that really nice, really light green. Now, if I want it to be a little bit darker, I sometimes talk about in my videos, but I'll kind of go for more that like cream or milk consistency. So it's a good way to sort of give words, give labels to the consistency of your paint, just to help you know what kind of color you're gonna get while you're painting. So now, as I go, I can see I have my watery paint, I'll show it this way. I have my watery paint on this side of my palette. Over here, it's more to that creamy consistency. And when I go paint, I'm gonna get a much, much darker leaf. Now, if I wanted it super, super dark, I can go straight into that paint on my palette, making sure that I'm adding water, but I can get that really, really dark paint. I'll just mix a bit of blue in there. And that, again, testing on my napkin to make sure it's not too dry. That consistency is closer to a paste, but not quite. And it's with that that I can get the fine details. So I'll add just to one of the leaves that I've already painted that are dry. Oh, that wasn't quite dry, that's okay. But yeah, so this one wasn't quite dry because it was the one I added a ton of water to. But you see how dark it comes through. So again, more of that paste, I'll just paint some lines over here. You get that really nice, really pigmented paint, and you get the more vibrant colors. If you guys are struggling with getting those vibrant colors, one of the things to check for is what type of paint you're using. If you guys want me to talk a little bit more about that, then let me know in the comments below. I hope that this information was helpful. Like I said before, if you guys practice, 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 it will make such a difference in your painting. So please do let me know in the comments below if you found this video helpful or if there's something that you'd like to see in the future. Also, I noticed that a lot of you guys watching aren't yet subscribed to this channel, so make sure that you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and I'll see you next time.